I went to my lake cabin to rent it out and found my daughter-in-law's parents moving in with a trailer. They laughed. Our daughter gave us the code. This cabin will be hers anyway. Hours later, a man can spend most of his life building something with his own hands and still watch strangers decide it already belongs to them. I learned that on a gray Tuesday morning when I drove out to my lake cabin to meet a rental agent and instead found my daughter-in-law's parents unloading furniture into my garage. The cabin sits on Douglas Lake, about an hour and 20 minutes from my house. Nothing extravagant. 3 bedrooms, cedar siding, a screened porch, a stone fireplace, a dock out back, and a view of the water that looks different every hour of the day depending on the light. My late wife picked out the cabinet pulls herself. She painted the guest room a pale green she never quite settled on a name for. She planted hydrangeas along the side path that still come up every spring whether anyone's there to see them or not. She kept a blue and white quilt folded over the back of the living room couch, the one she made the winter before she got sick. After she passed, I couldn't bring myself to sell the place. For almost 3 years, I barely used it. 6 weekends total, maybe fewer. That spring, I finally decided it was time to rent it out in 6-month stretches. Traveling nurses, retired couples, people who wanted quiet and would respect a home that still had my wife's fingerprints on every surface. I hired a local property agent to help manage it. She was blunt, capable, exactly the kind of person you want standing between your property and the general public. We had a retired couple already interested. Good credit, no pets. Willing to sign a lease and wait a week while I cleared out a few personal things first. So I drove out that Tuesday to meet my agent at 10:30, take the final listing photos, remove my wife's quilt so it wouldn't get worn out under strangers, and reset the door lock box. Rain came down soft and steady the whole drive, not a storm. Just the kind of gray rain that makes the trees look darker and the road shine like wet glass. I remember thinking I should have brought a thermos instead of gas station coffee. I remember thinking the dock probably needed resealing before fall. Ordinary thoughts, peaceful thoughts. Then I turned off the county road and saw a white moving trailer backed up to my garage. At first, my mind refused to make sense of it. There was a black SUV parked crooked in the driveway, an older sedan near the side steps, and a pickup truck parked half on the grass. The garage door stood open. A mattress leaned against the wall inside. Cardboard boxes were stacked beneath my fishing rods. Someone had propped a push broom against my wife's old potting bench like it belonged there. I stopped at the end of the driveway and did not get out. That part matters. I did not go charging up to that house like some fool in a movie. There were people inside my property and I had no idea how many. So I took pictures. Every vehicle, every license plate. 30 seconds of video showing the open garage, the trailer, a man in a gray hoodie carrying a box through the front door. Then I called the county sheriff's office and told the dispatcher I was the property owner, that I had unauthorized people inside my home, and that I needed a deputy present before I approached. She asked if I was safe. I said yes. She told me to stay in my vehicle, so I stayed. That was when my daughter-in-law's father walked out onto the porch holding one of my coffee mugs. Not just any mug. My late wife's mug, white ceramic with little blue birds painted on the side, chipped near the handle from 20 years of daily use. He looked down the driveway, saw my truck, and smiled like I had arrived late to his party. He raised the mug in greeting. I rolled the window down 2 inches. "You should have told us you were coming," he called out. "We would have saved you breakfast." I looked at the trailer, then the boxes stacked under my fishing rods, then the mug in his hand. "Why are you in my cabin?" He gave a small laugh, the kind men like him use when they want your question to sound silly instead of serious. "She said it was fine," he said. "We're between situations right now. Just needed somewhere to settle while we figure out our next step." "Settle," I repeated. He glanced back at the trailer and shrugged like it explained itself. "Couple weeks, maybe a month. No need to make a thing out of it. Family helps family." Before I could answer, his wife appeared behind him on the porch, wearing my late wife's old cardigan. I had kept that cardigan hanging on the hook by the back door because sometimes grief makes you preserve things that serve no practical purpose at all. Seeing that woman in it turned something cold in my chest. "This place is adorable," she said, smiling like she was greeting an old friend. "I always told our daughter she was lucky, marrying into a family with lake property." Then her husband said the line, the one that changed everything. "Relax," he said. "Our daughter gave us the code. This cabin will be hers anyway." A younger man might have shouted. I am not a younger man. I looked at him, then at his wife, then at the mug and the cardigan and the open garage full of my things behind them both. "The sheriff is on the way," I said. His smile dropped half an inch. "For what? For people moving into my house without written permission?" His wife's mouth tightened. "Don't be dramatic." "I am being very calm," I said. "That is not the same thing." A deputy arrived 11 minutes later. Early 40s, polite, careful, with the patient eyes of a man who has heard every family excuse there is. I handed him my license, pulled up the deed information on my phone, and showed him the access log confirming that only 2 codes had ever been authorized for that cabin, mine and my property agent's. He walked up to the house with me. There were 7 people inside, not 2. My daughter-in-law's father and mother, her brother's girlfriend, her mother's sister, a teenage nephew sprawled across my recliner with muddy sneakers on the cushion, and one man I had never never met, standing in my kitchen, spreading cream cheese on a bagel over one of my late wife's cutting boards. Boxes filled the hallway. A dresser had already been carried into the guest room. In my office, 2 suitcases sat open on the daybed. They had not come for a weekend. They had come to occupy. My property agent arrived while the deputy was still sorting names. She stood in the doorway with her raincoat dripping onto the mat and looked at the mess like she was inspecting a crime scene. "You want me to cancel today's rental photos?" she said quietly. "Not cancel," I said. "Postpone." Her father heard that exchange and tried to laugh again. It didn't land this time. "Come on," he said to the deputy. "This is a family misunderstanding." The deputy looked at me instead of him. "Did you give any of these individuals permission to enter or stay here?" "No." "Did you authorize anyone else to give permission on your behalf?" "No." Her father pointed at me with the mug still in his hand. "His daughter-in-law gave us the code." The deputy turned back to him. "Is she the owner?" Silence. "No," I said. "She is not." That was the first time I saw her mother look worried. The deputy did not arrest anyone that morning, though I would have had every right to push harder. I made a decision standing there in the rain. I wanted a report. I wanted them removed. I wanted names, plates, photos, and a legal record. What I did not want was for my son to find out his wife's parents had been hauled out of his mother's cabin in handcuffs before I understood how deep any of this actually went. Not yet. Not before I knew what I was dealing with. They were given 2 hours to load what they had brought in. The deputy stayed. My agent stayed. I stayed on the porch and watched rain drip from the eaves while her family carried boxes back out to the trailer in near total silence. Nobody spoke to me. Nobody apologized. The teenage nephew wouldn't even look up from his phone as he walked past with a lamp under one arm. When her father came out with the last box, he paused beside me. "You're making enemies you don't need," he said. I looked at the mug still sitting on the porch rail where I'd told him to leave it an hour earlier. "Put it on the rail and get in your car." His jaw worked once. Then he did. After the trailer pulled out, my agent called a locksmith before I even asked her to. By 3 that afternoon, every exterior lock had been changed. The garage code was erased. The alarm company had a new password. 2 cameras went up before sunset, one aimed at the driveway, one aimed at the dock. I paid the installer before he left the property. Then I called my son. He answered cheerful the way he always does. "Hey Dad, you at the lake?" "Yes," I said. "I need you to answer me carefully. Did you give your wife the code to the cabin?" There was a pause. "Yeah, last winter. She said she wanted to drop off some dishes we'd sent home with them for the holidays." "Why? What happened? Did you tell her she could hand that code to her parents?" "No." His voice changed immediately, all the cheer gone out of it. "Dad, what happened?" I told him. Not with heat. Heat makes people defensive, and I needed him thinking clearly, not bracing for a fight. I gave him the facts in order. The trailer, the boxes, 7 people, not 2. His mother's cardigan on a woman who had no right to it, the mug, the sheriff's report, the new locks. By the time I finished, he was breathing like a man trying hard not to break something. "I didn't know," he said. "I believe you. I'm calling her right now." "You will," I said. "But listen to me first. This is not a fight between you and me. This is not me punishing your marriage. This is me protecting what your mother and I built." "I know." "No," I said. "You don't know yet, but you will." After I hung up with my son, I called my attorney. She had handled the sale of my company years earlier, my late wife's estate, and enough contracts since then to know exactly what my voice meant when it dropped into that particular register. I sent her the photos, the deputy's report number, names, plates. She called back 40 minutes later. "This was not borrowing a weekend," she said. "I noticed. Did you find any mail?" "No, not yet." "Look." So I looked. In the kitchen drawer, underneath a stack of takeout menus that hadn't been there before, I found a folded receipt from a storage facility 2 towns over. Delivery address listed as my cabin. In the trash beside the desk, my agent found a torn envelope from a Mississippi insurance company addressed to her father at my lake address. Behind the printer in my office, I found a handwritten list in her mother's neat, careful script. Change mailing address, call the electric company, ask about the title timeline. Do not mention to her husband yet. That last line sat on the page like something venomous. I photographed it and sent it to my attorney. She called back with 2 words, "Come tomorrow." The next morning, I sat in my attorney's office with coffee. I never drank while she spread documents across her conference table. She had already drafted a formal notice of trespass to her father and mother. She had a separate letter to my daughter-in-law, measured, not accusatory, revoking any permission she believed she'd been given to access the cabin. She had instructions ready for the alarm company, the sheriff's office, and my property agent. Then she placed a single yellow legal pad in front of me. "Now," she said, "we talk about your estate." I leaned back in the chair. "I'm listening." She tapped the pad with her pen. "Your current will leave most assets to your son outright, correct?" "Yes." "And if he receives assets that way after your death, those assets can become vulnerable, depending on how they're handled, mixed, borrowed against, pressured, dragged into marital conflict." I looked toward the window. Rain had followed me back from the lake. It streaked down the glass in thin, crooked lines. She waited. Good attorneys know when silence is doing the work for them. Finally, I said, "My wife used to tell me I was generous with doors." "What does that mean?" "It means I leave too many of them open." She nodded once. "Then let's build walls." For the next 3 weeks, I did not argue with my daughter-in-law's parents. I did not answer her father's 2 phone calls. I did not respond to her mother's long text message about humiliation and family compassion. I did not post anything online. I did not gossip with neighbors. I took every document my attorney prepared, signed what needed signing, and followed her instructions exactly. The cabin rental was delayed, but not ruined. My agent found a different couple, a retired Navy man and his wife, and I personally walked them through the property once it had been thoroughly cleaned. I told them there had been an unauthorized access issue, that it had been handled through proper legal channels, and that they would be safe and undisturbed for the full term of their lease. I gave them a 6-month contract with a clause guaranteeing their occupancy, even if I restructured ownership. No innocent person was going to pay for someone else's greed. My son came to see me alone that Friday evening. He looked tired, older than 35. That happens to sons when they realize marriage is not only love and vacations and holiday cards. Sometimes marriage is also deciding what kind of boundary has to be built before resentment moves in and never leaves. She says she panicked, he told me. Her parents lost their rental down south. Her dad told her they just needed somewhere to breathe for a few days. She gave him the code and told him not to stay overnight. He brought a trailer anyway. Did she know about the mail, the storage receipt? His eyes dropped. She says no, but she knew he was pushing. He kept saying family assets should stay available to family. I let that sit between us for a moment. Do you believe her? I believe she was scared of him, my son said. I also believe she lied to me by omission. That was a hard sentence for a son to say out loud. I respected him for saying it anyway. I stood, walked to the mantel, and picked up a photograph of my late wife at the cabin. She was laughing in that picture, wearing a straw hat too big for her head, holding a paintbrush because she'd decided the porch railing needed one more coat for the 3rd time that summer. I loved your mother more than anything, I said, and even she didn't get to make decisions by pretending I'd never find out. He swallowed hard. I know. No marriage survives without kindness, I said. But no marriage survives without truth either. I know that too. Good, because we're putting the cabin into a trust. Nothing changes for you. You still inherit everything. But no in-law, no spouse, no future relative circling the property will ever get a key without my name on the release. He nodded slowly. Okay. We signed the trust paperwork that Thursday. The property trust, named in memory of my late wife, held the cabin under trustee authority instead of direct ownership. Any spouse seeking shared use or derivative claims through my son would require a post-nuptial agreement reviewed by independent counsel. No in-law, no sibling of a spouse, no extended family member of any kind would have any right of access without written authorization from the trustee. My attorney sent the certified trespass notices that same afternoon. Her father's copy was signed for at his temporary address. Her mother's copy came back undeliverable and was resent by certified mail a second time until it finally cleared. I drove back out to the cabin that weekend. The new locks worked exactly as they should. The cameras caught nothing but rain and a raccoon crossing the dock at 2 in the morning. My agent had the retired Navy couple moved in on schedule, and when I stopped by to check on them, the wife told me how much she loved the hydrangeas along the side path. For a while, it felt finished. I want to be honest about that, because it matters to what came after. I genuinely believed, for those few weeks, that the worst of it was behind me. The trust was signed. The locks were changed. My son knew the truth. His wife had been honest, at least about the part she was willing to admit to. Her parents had been served notice and had gone quiet. I thought a line had been drawn and that the line would hold. I was wrong about how much of the picture I was actually looking at. 6 weeks passed. My son told me he and his wife had started seeing a counselor together, which I took as a good sign, since people who intend to give up on something rarely bother scheduling appointments for it. My agent sent me a photo of the cabin porch swept clean, my late wife's quilt folded safely in a cedar chest at my own house instead of exposed to strangers on a couch. The retired Navy couple settled in without incident. I started sleeping better than I had in months. Her father tried once to send a package to the cabin address. It was refused at the door and documented by my agent per my attorney's instructions. Her mother sent my daughter-in-law a single text message that read, "After all we sacrificed for you," and my daughter-in-law did not respond to it for 3 days. I let myself believe that silence meant the matter was closed. It was my son, of all people, who noticed the first thing that didn't add up. He called me on a Sunday afternoon, and his voice had a flatness to it I didn't like. "Dad," he said, "can you check something for me?" "What is it?" I asked. "The county property tax portal. I was helping her file some paperwork for her mom's old car title, and I ended up looking at our own accounts while I had the login open. There's a notice on the cabin parcel, a change of mailing address request, filed 2 months ago." My stomach went cold in a way it hadn't since that Tuesday morning in the rain. 2 months ago was before any of this happened, I said. "Before the trailer." "I know," he said. "That's what's bothering me." I drove to the county assessor's office myself the next morning instead of waiting on a phone call. The clerk pulled the record without much interest, the way clerks do when they've filed 1,000 of these and this one looks like every other. A change of mailing address had indeed been submitted for the cabin parcel 2 months before the day I found the trailer in my driveway. The request had been denied automatically because the name on the submission didn't match the name on the deed, but it had been submitted. Someone had tried. The name on the rejected form was her father's. I sat in my truck in the assessor's parking lot for a long time before I could make myself drive home. If he had tried to change the mailing address 2 months before the trailer showed up, then the trailer wasn't a man in a desperate moment grabbing whatever shelter he could find. It was a step in something that had already been in motion. Someone doesn't quietly attempt to redirect tax mail on a property they don't own unless they're already planning around owning it eventually, or at least around other people believing they do. I called my attorney that afternoon and told her what the assessor's office had shown me. That's That's a paper trail, she said. That's not panic. Panic doesn't file government forms 2 months in advance. I thought this was over. It might not be, she said. I want you to think back. Is the lake cabin the only property in the family that could be a target for something like this? The question sat wrong in my chest before I even had an answer for it. There's the rental duplex, I said slowly. The one my late wife and I bought before I sold the business. It's in my name too. 2 units, both currently leased. Have you checked on it recently? I hadn't. Not in months. It ran itself mostly through a different management company, and I had never once had reason to worry about it. I'll call the property manager tonight, I said. The property manager for the duplex was a woman named nothing I need to repeat here. Competent, unbothered by much of anything. The kind of person who has genuinely seen it all in 20 years of managing rentals for absentee owners. When I called her, she didn't sound alarmed at first. She sounded confused, the way people sound when they're trying to make 2 facts fit together and they don't quite want to say the uncomfortable thing out loud yet. Actually, I'm glad you called, she said. There's something I've been meaning to run past you. About a month ago, a woman came by the office, said she was your daughter-in-law here on your behalf, asking about the lease terms on Unit 2. Said the current tenants were considering breaking their lease early and that your family might want to explore the unit for personal use. I gripped the phone harder than I meant to. Did you give her any information? General lease terms, sure. That's public knowledge anyway. But I told her any changes to occupancy or usage would need to come directly from you in writing. She said she understood. She seemed perfectly polite about it. Did she say why she was asking? She mentioned her parents were between homes and that the family was looking at options. I didn't think much of it at the time. Families ask about that kind of thing more than you'd expect. I sat with the phone against my ear for a long moment after she finished talking, working through what she'd just told me, trying to figure out whether the woman who'd walked into that rental office a month ago had been acting entirely on her own or acting on behalf of someone else who had learned from the failed attempt at the cabin that a full trailer and an unannounced arrival was the wrong way to go about it. That next time, the smart move was to ask quietly first, softly, through the front door instead of the back one. I thought about the handwritten list behind my printer. Change mailing address, call the electric company, ask about the title timeline. Do not mention to her husband yet. I had read that list as a plan for the cabin. I had never once considered that it might have been a template. I called my son again that night. This time, I didn't wait for him to ask what was wrong. I need you to ask your wife something for me, I said, and I need you to actually watch her face when she answers. My son called me back 2 hours later. His voice had none of the flatness from that morning. It had gone somewhere colder than that. She admitted it, he said. She went to the duplex office. She says her dad asked her to, back before any of this happened at the cabin. He told her the cabin was just a backup plan in case the duplex didn't work out, and that either way, family should always have a foothold on family property. Those were his exact words, a foothold. When did he first ask her to look into the duplex? She says almost 3 months ago. 3 months. Before the failed change of address form at the assessor's office. Before the trailer. Before any of it that I had actually witnessed with my own eyes. There's more, my son said, and I could hear him steadying himself before he said it. She found something on her dad's laptop, back when she still trusted him enough to borrow it for something innocent. A folder. Not hidden, exactly, just named something boring enough that nobody would look twice. Family documents. Inside it were printouts. Property records for the cabin. Property records for the duplex. A rough draft of a letter to a probate attorney down in Mississippi asking, hypothetically, about establishing residency claims on a property where an in-law had lived rent-free for an extended period, in a state where that kind of thing sometimes matters more than people expect. I had to sit down. He was building a case, I said slowly, before he ever set foot in my cabin. I think so, Dad. I think the trailer wasn't a beginning. I think it was supposed to be step 1 of an actual plan, and it only looked like a desperate one-time thing because it got shut down so fast that we never saw what step 2 and step 3 were supposed to look like. I thought back to the day in the driveway, to how confident her father had been standing on my porch holding my wife's mug, like the outcome was already decided, and I was the one being unreasonable for showing up and asking questions. I had read that confidence as entitlement. Ordinary, garden variety, someone else owes me something entitlement, which I had certainly seen plenty of in my life. I had not read it as the calm of someone who had already rehearsed every line of this on paper long before he ever stood on that porch. Bring me everything she found, I said. Every printout, every draft. I'm calling the attorney first thing tomorrow. My attorney went quiet for a long stretch when I laid it all out for her the next morning. Photos of the folder contents my daughter-in-law had forwarded at her own insistence once she understood what her father had actually been doing behind the version of events he'd fed her. The failed change of address form from the assessor's office. The property manager's account of the visit to the duplex. A rough, unsent draft of a letter referencing residency, claims that had clearly been written with legal advice in mind, even if it had never actually been sent to an attorney. I want to be very direct with you, she finally said. What you're describing isn't a family member overstaying a welcome. This is the outline of an attempt to manufacture a claim on 2 separate properties, using your daughter-in-law as the access point for both, without her initially understanding the scope of what she was being asked to help with. Can he actually do that? Manufacture a claim like that? Not successfully. Not with the paper trail you now have documenting every step of it. But that's not really the question that should be keeping you up tonight, then what is? The question is how many other doors he tried that we don't know about yet, and whether he's done trying now that the first two have been slammed shut in his face. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about the handwritten list behind my printer, about how small and almost domestic it had looked at the time. Change the mailing address, call the electric company. It read like a moving checklist. What I hadn't grasped, standing over it that first day, was that it might have been only the opening page of something much longer, most of which I hadn't found yet, some of which might not exist anywhere but inside one man's head. My attorney called back at 9 the next morning with a plan, a meeting, all parties present. Her office, not my home, not the cabin, neutral ground with cameras in the hallway, and a receptionist out front and a deputy's report already sitting in the file from the very first day. I want everyone in the same room, she said. Your son, his wife, her parents. I want to lay out everything we've found, in order, in front of all of them at once, so there's no version of this story left for anyone to tell themselves afterward, except the true one. He'll deny it. Let him try, she said. We have the paperwork. We have the timeline. We have his own daughter's testimony about what he told her and when. There's nowhere left for him to stand. The meeting was set for the following Saturday morning. I arrived first, the way I always try to. Navy suit, gray tie, polished shoes, not for drama, for discipline. My attorney had the documents stacked in exact order on the conference table, along with printed photographs from my driveway camera, the sheriff's original report, the insurance envelope, the storage receipt, the assessor's rejected change of address form, and the printouts my daughter-in-law had pulled from her father's laptop folder labeled Family Documents. My son and his wife arrived together. He looked steady in a way that told me the counseling sessions had done at least some of their job. She looked pale, and I could tell she had cried before coming, but she held herself upright walking through that door, which was more than I'd expected of her 3 months earlier. Her parents arrived 7 minutes late. Her father wore a sport coat and the expression of a man who still believed he was walking into a room he could dominate through sheer confidence alone. Her mother wore pearls and carried a folder of her own, which told me she still thought this was a negotiation rather than a reckoning. My attorney began before anyone had a chance to settle comfortably into their chairs. Thank you all for coming, she said. This meeting concerns unauthorized access to your lake property, an attempted change of official records on that same property, an undisclosed inquiry into a second property you own, and a documented pattern connecting all three. Her father let out a short laugh. A pattern? You dragged us here with lawyer words to scare your own family. My attorney looked at him over the top of her glasses. If you interrupt me again, this meeting ends, and all further communication goes through certified mail only. He leaned back. Her mother touched his sleeve without looking at him. My attorney continued. She started with the timeline, laid out an order on the table so everyone in the room could follow it without needing to trust her word for any single piece of it. 3 months before the trailer appeared in my driveway, her father had first asked his daughter to inquire about the rental duplex, framing it to her as simple curiosity about family real estate. 2 months before the trailer, he had personally submitted a change of mailing address request on the lake cabin parcel, a request the county had automatically rejected because his name didn't match the deed, but a request that existed in the public record regardless of whether it succeeded. 1 month before the trailer, his daughter had visited the duplex's management office in person, asking about lease terms and framing the inquiry as a family exploring its options. Then, the day of the trailer itself, 7 people, a month's worth of boxes, a confident, rehearsed line about a daughter's future ownership, delivered with the ease of a man who had already convinced himself the outcome was inevitable. None of that, my attorney said, is the behavior of someone caught off guard by a housing emergency. That is the behavior of a man executing a plan in stages, adjusting his approach each time a step failed, and using his own daughter, initially without her full understanding, as the access point for every single stage of it. Her father's face had gone rigid. You have no idea what you're talking about. My attorney slid a printed page across the table. It was the letter my son's wife had described, the draft addressed to a probate attorney in Mississippi, laying out a hypothetical claim to residency rights on a property an in-law had occupied without paying rent for a long stretch of time. This was found on a laptop your daughter had access to, she said. It was never sent, but it was written, and the property it describes matches the cabin, down to the state where any such claim would need to be filed. The room went very quiet. Dad, my son said, and his voice cracked slightly on the word, you told her the cabin was a backup plan, in case the duplex didn't work out. Her father's jaw worked. He looked at his daughter, and for the first time since I had known him, I watched something like real fear cross his face, not fear of the room, but fear of what his own child now understood about him. I was protecting this family's future, he said. Your mother-in-law and I raised her. We have every right to expect that family looks after family, in whatever form that needs to take. You had a right to ask for help, my son said. You didn't have a right to build a legal case against my father's property using my wife, without telling her what she was actually helping you do. Her mother spoke for the first time, her voice thin. We never would have actually gone through with any of it. It was just talk, just planning, in case things got worse for us. You submitted a government form, my attorney said quietly. That is not talk. That is an action, on the public record, with your husband's name attached to it. Her mother had no answer for that. I had been silent through most of this, letting the paperwork and the timeline do the talking the way my attorney had asked me to. But I looked at my daughter-in-law then, sitting very still beside my son, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone pale, and I understood in that moment the actual shape of what had happened to her over the previous 3 months. She had not simply given her father a code out of a moment's panic on a rainy weekend. She had been slowly recruited, one small ask at a time, each one framed as harmless, each one building towards something she never fully saw the outline of, until her own husband asked her to look at her father's laptop and watch her face while she answered. That was the moment I finally understood the whole shape of what had actually happened. The thing the trailer in my driveway had only ever been the visible tip of. It hadn't been a single desperate afternoon. It had been a campaign, run in careful stages over 3 months, using the person closest to both families as the unwitting key to every locked door along the way, and the only reason it had ever come apart at all was that the very first stage had been clumsy enough, loud enough, badly timed enough in the rain that Tuesday morning that I happened to catch it before it could quietly succeed. Her father must have seen something shift in my face because he tried one more time to reclaim the room. "You think a piece of paper makes you better than us," he said. "No," I said. "I think my work makes it mine. And I think you spent 3 months trying to take it from me one careful step at a time, and the only mistake you actually made was letting me see the first step before you'd finished planning the rest of them." He had nothing left to say to that. My daughter-in-law finally looked up. She looked at her father, then at her mother, then for a long moment at nothing at all, just the surface of the table in front of her. "I gave you the code because you said you were desperate," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You never once told me there was a plan. You let me believe I was helping you through something hard. You were building a file on my husband's father the entire time, and you used me to do it." Her father opened his mouth to answer her. "Don't," she said. "Not this time." He stood up so fast his chair scraped hard against the floor. "Come on, we're leaving." Her mother didn't move at first. She looked at her daughter, and for just a second, something that might have been shame crossed her face before it hardened back into the same practiced composure she'd carried into the room. My attorney lifted one final page before either of them could reach the door. "Before you leave," she said, "you need to understand this clearly. The trespass notice on the cabin remains active regardless of today. Any future attempt to access either property, submit records on either property, or contact either management company regarding either property will be treated as a continuation of the same documented pattern and will be referred directly to law enforcement without further warning." Her father stopped at the door, but didn't turn around. "You people act like we're criminals," he said. "Nobody in this room called you criminals," my attorney said. "The paperwork did that on its own." He left without answering. Her mother followed him out a few seconds later, and she did not look back at her daughter on her way through the door. The room stayed quiet for a long time after it closed. My son reached over and took his wife's hand. She let him, and then she leaned into him, her shoulders finally dropping from wherever she'd been holding them for the entire meeting, and I watched my son hold his wife while she cried in a way that had nothing performative left in it at all, nothing aimed at anyone in the room, just 3 months of something finally breaking loose. I sat across the table from both of them and said nothing for a while, because there are moments when the kindest thing a father can do is let his son's marriage have the silence it actually needs instead of filling it with his own relief. My attorney began quietly gathering the file into its folder. I looked at the photograph still sitting near the edge of the table, the one of my late wife laughing on the porch in that ridiculous straw hat, and I thought about how she used to tell me I left too many doors open. I thought about how long it had taken me to understand exactly how many doors there had actually been.